What's up, Duval? I am Bucky Brooks, and you have joined me on a new podcast called Believe in Jaguars. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to take you on a journey where we talk about all things Jaguars while also tapping into a little bit of my experience in the National Football League. So, if you haven't heard about me, if you haven't seen or listened to anything that I've been on, I'm going to give you a quick little recap. So, my name is Bucky Brooks. I'm a former NFL player and scout, spent 12 years in the league, played for five different teams, and the Jacksonville Jaguars were one of those teams in 96 and 97. Had a great affinity for the franchise and the city. And so now I'm back talking all things Jags. Cover the Jags in the preseason, doing the color commentary on their preseason broadcast, and I serve as the sideline field analyst on a radio broadcast during the regular season. So, what we're going to do is we're going to tap into some of my experience and perspective as a former player and scout with some of my kind of connections in and around the league while also being able to hone in directly on the Jaguars. I'm really excited about the Jags. I'm really excited about where they're going, even though last year finished on a little bit of a disappointing note. Look, back-to-back winning seasons. I feel like Doug Peterson has a plan to get this team back on track. And I think that is reflected in some of the things that they did in the offseason. So let's talk about the offseason. In the offseason, after having kind of the disappointing finish to the year, the team decided to basically flip the entire defensive staff. Ushered out Mike Caldwell and his defensive assistants and brought in a handful of new defensive guys to really rebuild a defense and hopefully take this defense from, I would say, like mid-level to maybe becoming a good to great defense in the near future. So the biggest hire of the moves would be Ryan Nielsen coming in as the new defensive coordinator. So Ryan Nielsen was a player at SC. I remember scouting and going through there doing that, but he spent like 6 years with the New Orleans Saints before becoming a defensive coordinator with the Atlanta Falcons last year. When you look at the growth of the Atlanta Falcons defense, man, his fingerprints are all over it. They were aggressive. They played fast and free, did a really good job of turning the ball over. And when you watch this defense on tape, it was really fun to watch. Some of the new players that they had come in, Jesse Bates, and those guys really flourished in that system. So Nielsen comes over, takes over the Jaguars defense, and his introductory presser, I thought he really revealed the plan for how he wants to play with the Jaguars defense. Two words came to mind when I listened to the presser. He talked about attack and aggressiveness. So when you go back and you kind of dig into his history, you know that he's really tied to Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll has always been really, really successful with attack style defenses that were simple for his players, that allowed them to play fast and free. But the aggressiveness came from the fact that they knew exactly what they were doing. So now it was all about effort and attacking the ball. But when you hear Nielsen talk in the introductory presser, he talked about that. He talked about turnovers and disruptive plays. Disruptive plays can be described as sacks, tackles for loss, pass breakups, things that really put the offense behind the chains. And so those are essential to playing good defense in this league. And so he is really committed to making sure that this team plays with passion. They run to the ball. They do a great job of tackling. And all of that is part of playing great defense. The other thing that is a really big part of his scheme and his style and how he wants the Jaguars to play going forward, he talked about nothing cheap and nothing deep. So when you think about the way the game is played in this league, quarterbacks want to really live on the layups. The layups are the bubble screens, the quick rhythm passes, the things that are really catch, rock, and roll throws, meaning the quarterback catches out the gun, he flips it out to the perimeter, and then the wide receivers just gather chunks of yards on run after catch plays, things that are really easy in nature, high completion percentage passes, and they live on that. Well, he wants to take those things away. And so one of the things that will be hallmarks of this Jaguars defense will be press coverage on the outside, meaning that you'll see the cornerbacks engaged in nose-to-nose coverage. They will walk up over the wide receivers, eliminate the free access, and really challenge quarterbacks to make more tight window throws. Now, the key to that, when you press so much and you're nose to nose, can you take away the gimmies while also eliminating the deep balls? When you look at the Jaguars last year, too many big balls over the top of the defense, just whether it's blown coverage or poor execution by the defenders on the perimeter, just gave up too many deep balls. Well, the number one thing that would be talked about on the outside is, hey, let's eliminate the deep balls. Let's play press coverage, but let's play what coaches will call top down, meaning the defender always stays on top, doesn't allow the receiver to run by him, and everything that they catch should be something that's either going back to the quarterback or in front of the defense. And the goal is, let's make the quarterback kind of amass completions by making tight window throws at short to intermediate range. And we're going to say the odds suggest that the offense can drive the ball down the length of the field. So that's what we'll see in the back end. Up front, everyone wants to know, what is the defense going to look like up front? In the past, the last couple of years under Mike Caldwell, we would see an odd front, meaning that there would be a nose tackle right over the center, and it would really, on early downs, be a five-man front. You would see Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker standing up on the edges. You see the big guys kind of moving around on the inside. But in essence, it was a five-man front designed to create one-on-one matchups. That'll be changed this year. You'll see more of a four-man front in their base defense with Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen presumably on the edges. Eric Armstead, a new addition, probably on the inside, and Ward Robinson Harrison and Devon Hamilton playing on the inside at nose or kind of kicking and sliding the front. But a four-man front as opposed to a five-man front, which is a big difference overall when it comes to the scheme. People will talk about, well, is it a 4-3 scheme? In reality, in today's NFL, you're playing it like nickel about 70 to 75% of the time. So that means that you can see five DBs on the field, two linebackers. I would think Foye Oluokun and Devin Lloyd will kind of be those guys tasked with playing that. And then your four D linemen up front in some capacity wreaking havoc. In the back end, when we talk about those five DBs, it could be three corners and two safeties. It might be a big nickel package where you put three safeties in and two corners on the outside. But a lot of that will be determined by the matchups and who they're playing. Part of what Nelson talked about is being able to match up, being able to throw different looks, being able to be complex in appearance, but simplistic in terms of design and highly efficient in terms of execution. So he wants to make sure that the Jaguars are playing fast, they're playing free, they know exactly what they're doing, but the picture changes for the quarterback. And so when you go back, and I thought it was telling, Trevor Lawrence talked about facing this kind of defense, and he said that everything looks the same pre-snap, but the picture changes post-snap. For most quarterbacks, that is really hard to do because you never know what the tells are, meaning you never know what the tipping points are and what you're about to get. And so it requires the quarterback to process a lot of information after the snap. For the defense, that is, hey, we're going to play the same shell, the same pre-snap disguise, but we're going to do different things to get to it. And so even though the Jaguars will give the appearance of being in a too-high shell, too-high defense, there'll be a mix of man-to-man and zone to make sure that the quarterback never gets an accurate beat on what's going on. But in keeping with the premise of attack style, aggressive, not giving up the deep ball while also challenging the short stuff, it is one that is going to require a lot of teaching, a lot of diligent effort from the players to understand the concepts and what they're being asked to do, and then being able to execute those things on game day. So that leads me to what I think is probably one of the more important coaching hires on the defensive side of the ball, and that would be Chris Richard coming over to handle the defensive backs. Chris Richard has been in the league for a long time. He was a player in the league, played for the Seattle Seahawks, I think also maybe the Miami Dolphins, but he really has earned a reputation for being one of the most outstanding teachers at the position. When you go back and look at his work in Seattle, first as a secondary coach, then as a defensive coordinator, you can see how he was able to get his players to play at a high level. The Legion of Boom, Richard Sherman and Brian Maxwell and Brandon Browner and Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor all learned from Chris Richard and benefited from his teaching. I can tell you right now, in knowing him, he is a guy who demands a high level of accountability, but is a great teacher and instructor when it comes to making sure guys understand the techniques that are necessary to succeed. And so you may see him challenge guys in a different way, but what I can tell you is he's going to challenge them, but he's going to love them up when they do really good things. And so when you think about the youth and the inexperience in the secondary, Chris Richard is probably the right guy for the job. So I look forward to watching him and Ryan Nielsen work to kind of put together this scheme that kind of gives you the appearance of man to man, but is really zone. I think what you hear in coaching circles, they'll talk about man match. So it's a little combination of man, combination of zone, but when executed right, makes it very, very difficult for quarterbacks to be able to find open windows. Now, when we go to the other side of the ball, we had a change at the running back position. Jerry Mack comes over to replace Bernie Parmalee. And I love Bernie. But Jerry Mack comes over, and he has a great reputation for being a teacher and innovator. This is a guy who was a very young head coach at North Carolina Central University, which is when I first heard of him. 3-time HBCU Coach of the Year, led NC Central to 3 straight MEAC titles, which is a big deal. Won a Celebration Bowl. So this guy understands how to coach. But then he left there to go become an offensive assistant with Rice, ascended to associate head coach before making his way to Tennessee for 3 years and finally landing with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So now what you have in that running back room is a coach who understands not only the big picture because he's been an offensive coordinator, but he also understands the position and understands how to turn the macro into micro so that guys can understand the bigger picture, how they fit into the puzzle. And that should lead to, I would say, more success, more consistency, better results overall from the running backs as this offense looks to kind of maximize their potential going forward. No other changes. Offensively, you think about Press Taylor continuing to move forward as the offensive coordinator. Doug Peterson obviously can kind of jump in and jump out as a play caller, but the consistency on offense should continue to produce great results. Trevor Lawrence, hopefully if he's healthy and available to play, I think you'll see Trevor play more like he played in the first year under Doug than he did last year when the injuries really kind of impacted his game, particularly down the stretch when he wasn't able to practice for most of the weeks leading down the stretch, and it impacted the way that he played. I think he'll play much better. So let's now talk about the personnel. So when you have a season that ended the way that it did for the Jaguars, you can have, some guys come in, some guys go out, and all of those things. I would say just my observation of the team, it feels like there is a more concerted effort to bring in veteran guys who've been around winning programs, who can provide not only the experience and expertise in terms of winning, but they can give that leadership ability, that leadership skill that might have been lacking a little in the locker room at times. And so let's think about the guys that came in. Eric Armstead coming over from the San Francisco 49ers. If you watch the 49ers the last few years, their defensive line has been one of the best in the business. Eric Armstead has been a pivotal part of that. Disruptive defensive tackle with exceptional length, does a great job controlling blockers at the point of attack, has some pass rush ability, which is essential, but this is just a rock solid interior player who's going to give you a solid effort each and every day. I think the other part about him is when you talk to people in the Niners building, they just talk about him being the consummate professional, how he does everything the right way. And I think when you bring in an experienced player who still can play at a high level, but has that professionalism, I think what it does is it allows the young guys to look at someone who sets the right example in terms of how to prepare, how to play, how to be like a high-end player that has a lot of responsibilities on his shoulders. I think the combination of Eric Armstead with Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker now gives the Jaguars that big physical defensive line that they've always wanted. And in a 4-man scheme, you can see them creating problems at the point of attack. On the outside, Darius Williams goes out, Ron Darby comes in. Now, it's not necessarily a one-for-one trade. We're not saying that Ron Darby's going to come in and start and set the world on fire. But what he is going to do, he's going to bring veteran experience and expertise. He's a player who has played for Doug Peterson. He understands what the program should look like. In that defensive back room, it allows you to have another, I would say, culture extender to be able to kind of share the messages that Doug Peterson wants throughout the team. How to show up, how to prepare, how to get lined up, how we want to practice, how we want to play, all of those things. Ronald Darby can share some of that because he's been with Doug Peterson in the past, and he's had a lot of success in his career. You just think about 95 career starts. He's played nickel. He's played outside. He's been a really, really solid player for most of his career. I think that consistency is valuable for a team that was really inconsistent on the defensive side of the ball. So that's important. Another addition, Darnell Savage coming in, veteran defensive back, rock solid game, guy that played for the Green Bay Packers and played in a lot of big games for a franchise that is always kind of in the conversation for being one of the best. That experience really matters. When we go back and we look at last year, playing in meaningful games down the stretch, Jaguars, we just didn't play to the level that we wanted to play to finish out the season. Well, now when you bring in veterans who have played in those pressurized moments and had a lot of success, I think that winning experience allows you to have a bigger voice in the locker room, and it also allows you to help everyone get in line as you really try and take this team from good to great going forward. So Darnell Savage is a huge addition to go with that. On offense, Gabe Davis comes in, uh, and Calvin Ridley leaves. And Calvin Ridley had a great single season there, had 1,000 yards, had 8 touchdowns. Um, Even though some people might have expressed a little disappointment in some of the things he did, I think it's important to remember 2-year layoff was a little rusty, but found his way and really made a lot of plays when the team didn't have Christian Kirk and Zay Jones out there. Well, he leaves. He goes to a division rival in Tennessee. In come Gabe Davis. Now, Gabe Davis may not be necessarily the direct replacement for Calvin Ridley, but what he does do is he gives the Jaguars something that they've been lacking, and that's that big play receiver on the perimeter. When you look at Gabe Davis throughout his time at Buffalo, big play receiver, averaged over 16 yards per catch, has 27 touchdowns during his time with the Buffalo Bills. He's a dynamic red zone weapon who has the size to win the 50-50 ball, but also possesses the speed to take the top off the defense. When you look at the rest of the receiving core as it's presently constructed, Zay Jones is more of a possession receiver. Christian Kirk does his best work over the middle of the field in the slot. Evan Ingram obviously is a pass catcher playmaker on the underneath areas, but you didn't have anybody that could really take the top off the defense. Gabe Davis will settle in as that wide receiver 2 opposite Christian Kirk to give them that vertical threat so teams can't just squat and sit at the sticks to take away some of the intermediate passing game that the Jaguars really want to live in. When you think about a couple years ago, the Jaguars did a really good job of kind of owning that 10 to 15-yard box, a lot of crossing routes and those things. Well, without the threat of a vertical playmaker, teams got wise to that, started sitting at the sticks, started making those throws, contested throws for Trevor Lawrence. And so it just took away some of the efficiency. Gabe Davis should allow them to get back to not only finding more deep balls in the offense, but preventing teams from kind of clamping down on the intermediate areas. Devin Duvernay also comes over. Now, initially, the first thought when you hear Devin Duvernay signs, oh, okay, all-pro kick returner, going to add some more juice to the lineup to replace Jamal Agnew, who did a really good job for the Jags. Duvernay is a guy who has been a one-time All-Pro, two-time Pro Bowler, led the league in punt returns back in 2021, averaged over 13 yards per return. And I can tell you, watching him during his time at Texas, one of the fastest guys that you will find. I mean, he is a blur with the ball in his hands. What he also adds, though, is he has another receiver that you can throw into the mix in your 4-wide packages. This is a guy that started 24 games during his time with the Ravens, had 94 catches, almost 900 yards and 5 touchdowns. And what he gives you is a true number 4. So where Jamal Agnew would come in and be more of the gadget playmaker in those 4-wide sets, Devin Duvernay is more of a what we call a true wide receiver. So he can run the route tree. He's experienced. That's what he's done. He's done that his entire time from college to the pros. So it gives you a veteran number 4 receiver who also has big playability in the return game. And with the kickoff rules changing, Devin Duvernay could be a big factor because he's returned monster returns during his time in Baltimore. Now with the change, you could see field position work in the Jaguars' favor because Duvernay is special with the ball in his hands. The other addition on offense that is noteworthy, Mitch Morse coming over from the Buffalo Bills. He is important because, let's be honest, the center position has been an area of concern. Luke Fortner has not been able to play consistently at a high level. Like the snaps and stuff have been fine, but he hasn't been able to dominate and control the point of attack. Well, Mitch Morse is a veteran player. Doug Peterson is very familiar with him. He comes over from Buffalo. They had a lot of success in Buffalo. He's been a very, very solid player throughout his career. Well, now you have stability at the position. And as you look at the potential starting lineup, where you're able to have Cam Robinson at left tackle, Ezra Cleveland at left guard, maybe Mitch Morse at center, Brendan Scherf at right guard, and then Anton Harrison at right tackle, with Walker Little being a swing player, you probably feel more confident that you're not only going to be able to hold up in pass protection, but the running game should finally begin to get on track with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby and those guys having more success finding holes between the tackles. So Mitch Morse is a huge addition, not only because he appears to be an upgrade over Luke Fortner, but the experience continues a theme where you're just bringing more leadership, more professionalism into the locker room. And I think that's huge. When we talk about like this team and what they needed, not necessarily marquee free agents coming in, but just the right players to help this team get over the top. I think when you look at the personnel and you look at all the additions, minus some of the subtractions, I think you can say that this team on paper is notably better than it was a season ago. And I think that's significant considering at one point, this team was at the top of the division. This team looked like a shoe in to go to the playoffs before it fell apart down the end. If you can just add a little bit to a core that was already good enough to be in that conversation, I think you feel really good and really optimistic about what the Jaguars could be in 2024. But now, free agency just leads you into what we all are excited about. I mean, we're a little over 24 hours away from the NFL draft kicking off, and the draft is an opportunity to really upgrade your team. And the best teams do a great job of attacking their needs in free agency so they can take the best players available in the draft. It doesn't always work out like that, but sometimes you get lucky and you're able to just go in and say, hey, we're going to take the best player available. It doesn't matter what the position is. We just want to add really good players to the team. Well, in looking at this draft, let me tell you, the overview of the draft in general is, I would say, the top 3 rounds are really solid. A lot of talent, blue chip players at the top. It skews more heavy to the offense than the defense, but it's a talent laden draft, but there's a notable drop off after you get to about player 100. So what that tells me and what we should all pay attention to on the draft, your best players should come in the first 3 rounds, because the talent disparity between the first 3 rounds and the later rounds is significant in this draft. You can see a lot of teams bail on their day 3 picks because the word around the league is, hey, this draft is weak when it comes to it. Some of that is due to COVID. Some of that is due to just like the amount of early entrants over the past few years has just made it weak at the bottom of the draft. So even though we'll get excited about the Jaguars having 8 picks, just know that when we get to day 3, some of those picks may not be the players that we expect them to be, just because the draft thins out once we get to about pick 100. And then speaking of that, and talking about thinning out, let me just share with you that when it comes to the first round, here's what you should think about. Even though there are 32 picks in the first round, history suggests that normally there are about 18 to 24 players that are really worthy of being first round picks, meaning that we look at any board across the league, those names will be populated in the first round on draft boards. This year's class is a little different. Even though I can sit here and tell you that I really love some of the talent, when you talk to scouts and executives around the league, most of them have suggested there are about 15 to 18 blue chip first round players that can play. Most of those guys on the offensive side of the ball. I've been told that there are probably about 6 defensive players that carry true, unquestioned first round grades. So that is significant in this draft, that early you could see a run on offensive players as opposed to defensive players, because the talent is really weighted heavily on the offensive side of the ball. Well, let's talk about like where this draft is strong and where it's weak at. Okay, so at quarterback, when you talk to scouts around the league, they'll say, look, it's strong at the quarterback position. Now, they will tell you they don't know if there is a marquee player, a superstar player that you can write in. Yes, the conversation has been about Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is the presumptive number one pick that'll go to the Chicago Bears. But there's still some questions about what his ceiling will be. People have made the comparison to Patrick Mahomes. Some have said Aaron Rodgers and those things. I think he falls a little short of those guys, but he's super, super talented. Then there are about five other guys that carry first round grades on most draft boards. And so those guys will be Jaden Daniels, Drake May. They will be the last of what we consider the tier one prospects at the quarterback position. Then you'll have J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, Bo Nix in any particular order. They'll be the tier two prospects. And even though they may be rated at tier two, most people expect those guys to carry first round to top of the second round grades. So we expect all of those guys to be gone by the time we get to pick 50. And some would say that, hey, you may see 6 quarterbacks go in the top 15. It's kind of hard right now because everyone is just talking. It's a lot of smoke signals, but that's the general expectation. This draft is super strong at offensive tackle and wide receiver. At offensive tackle, there are as many as 8 guys that carry first round grades. And these guys are plug and play players, a little bit of development, but most of the top 8 offensive tackles, the expectation is these guys are going to be plugged right into a lineup and they're going to give you immediate return on investment. And so when we see the Joe Alts of the world come off the board, the Delis Fuangas, the Olu Fashanus, and J.C. Lathrams, and those guys, expect those guys to be day one starters wherever they go in the draft. At wide receiver, it's a little different because at wide receiver, what's interesting is you have the tier one players. The tier one would be Marvin Harrison Jr., it would be Roma Dunze, and it would also include Malik Neighbors. Those guys are rated as top 5 players in this draft. If you poll people on who are the top 5 players, 3 of those guys should probably be in the conversation, and they could be in any order. Even though we're conditioned to think that Marvin Harrison Jr. is the unanimous selection as wide receiver 1, I have talked to plenty of scouts who have, they have Malik Neighbors rated at number 1, and there's some others who have Roma Dunze rated at number 1. So there's a lot of respect for the top 3 receivers in this class. When you go beyond that, there are plenty of starters available that will kind of fall into that second and third round. But remember this, given a copycat league, there are people that are going to look for those later rounds, those mid to late rounds, to see if they can find the Puka Nakua that can come in and be a guy that gives you Pro Bowl caliber production right away. Tight end position is a little down outside of Georgia's Brock Bowers. Not the notable stars or impact players that we've seen come in the league. Sam Laporta has spoiled us where we think maybe a second round player can do it. But right now, if you had to ask me, who do I believe in? I would say that Brock Bowers is the only one that I believe at the position that is going to come in and be an impact player. The defensive back class, loaded with what I call solid to red chip players. I wouldn't say is loaded with blue chip players, meaning when you think about blue chip, when we throw that term out, think about guys that we expect to be top 5 players at their position within 2 to 3 years. In this draft class, people are talking about Quinyon Mitchell, maybe Terrion Arnold, but there's not that reverence for those guys as they have for a guy like Sauce Gardner when Sauce Gardner came out a few years ago. Really good, a lot of starters, but I don't know if you're going to get the game changer like a Jalen Ramsey when Jalen came out years ago and played for the Jags. The edge defender class, little top heavy, Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, Latu, ranking as the top 3 in any order, depends on styles. But after that, it really thins out quickly. So if you're going to get an edge rusher, it needs to happen early, or you're going to have to specifically target some guys that are in that day 2 range. Defensive tackle class is super light. It's light because there are only 2 guys that I consistently hear regarded as first-round talents. Those guys would be Byron Murphy from Texas and Jerzon Johnny Newton from Illinois. Everyone celebrates those guys. Everyone believes those guys are coming off the board in the first round. They carry first-round grades. Whenever I talk to people at other teams, like that's kind of the consensus when it comes to it. Linebacker class, intriguing, but not quite the first-round talent that we've seen in some years. Now, there is a little bit of the devaluation of the linebacker position. They're kind of treated like the defensive version of running backs, where people aren't necessarily willing to expend a high pick in an off-ball linebacker. That said, when I look at the playoffs and I look at 2 of the teams that are always deep in the playoffs, San Francisco 49ers, Baltimore Ravens, they invest in linebackers and it's worked out for them. If we're going to talk about some of the linebackers that stand out, Peyton Wilson is one from North Carolina State. This guy can do it all. Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M is really intriguing. And then Michigan's Junior Colston. Of that three, maybe one of those has an opportunity to kind of backdoor into the bottom of the first round, but I wouldn't expect to see multiple linebackers come off the board in the first round. So that's the general overview of the class and what we're talking about. Look at running back. Running back is down. When you talk to 5 different scouts, they can give you 5 different players in random order. There's not a consensus. This is one where the running backs will probably come off the board more 3rd to 5th round, with everyone probably getting more of a role player as opposed to the workhorse back. But there's some talent there. I just know if it's a frontline talent that we've grown accustomed to seeing sometimes at running back. So now let's get to the Jaguars and what the Jaguars' needs are. So I'm gonna say this, and this is how the league thinks. You have to nail your first 3 picks, meaning the bulk of your team, the best players on your team, mostly are your 1st, 2nd, and 3rd round picks. When we look at the board and the verbiage that goes with when you're selected, 1st round picks are supposed to be starters year 1. That's the expectation, depending on no matter where they are. If they're graded in the 1st round, the expectation they're going to be a starter, they're going to be a blue chip player, and they're going to be a guy that forms part of the nucleus that helps you make a run at a championship for the next 4 to 5 years. Your 2nd round players should be starters by year 2. They can be key contributors year 1. They're going to come in. They're going to make contributions. They should start. They could be spot starters, but you're banking on your 1st and 2nd rounders to be starters for a long time on your team. Your 3rd round player is a little more of a developmental player, but he is a spot starter, situational backup early. By year 2 or 3, he should be in the lineup making plays. So that's how it goes. The general rule for most general managers, they'll tell you, we have to make sure that we crush it the first 2 days of the draft. If we are able to land starters on day 1 and day 2, we've done a really good job. Anything that comes on day 3, meaning rounds 4 through 7, it's a little bit of luck involved because picks 4 through 7, if you're picked in round 4 through 7, you're viewed as a developmental prospect that will need some time to get onto the field, unless there was a character concern or a medical concern that dropped you into that range. But if you're drafted on day 3, it is developmental player who's going to make his contributions early on special teams, and hopefully he can stay in the league long enough to carve out a role that allows him to contribute to the team on a long-term basis. Well, taking that in mind and taking that board in mind, let's look at where the Jaguars have obvious needs and where they need to get better at immediately. So the top needs for me, in whatever order you want to do them: wide receiver, cornerback, and I would say edge defender. Those are the 3 areas where if you look at the roster right now, there are holes that need to be filled. And I love Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, but someone else needs to help them on the edges. They can't play like they played last year where they were the only show in town and they did everything. So you have to have some other players come. When I look at the picks that the Jaguars have, 17, 48, and 96, got to nail those first 3 because those are the 3 in the first 3 rounds. After that, pick 114, 116, 153, 212, and 236. Those are developmental picks where we got to find guys that can make contributions on special teams. Maybe they're backup players with the potential to develop into more. Maybe they're guys that have either a medical or a character concern that you're willing to roll the dice on. Those picks should happen 114, 116, 153, 212, or 236. So let's focus for this podcast. Let's focus on the first 3 rounds. Pick 17, 48, and 96. Okay, so what I did is I made a list of guys that I could see at each of those positions that could be in range of those picks when the Jaguars are on the clock. So let's start at wide receiver because I know people are really worried about the wide receiver position. I've been checking the Twitterverse and X, and I'm looking at everything is about wide receiver because Calvin Ridley departed. And even though Gabe Davis came on, there's worry and concern. Is Zay Jones going to be here? Can Gabe Davis man the role? We need another guy. Okay, so if that is the conversation, let's have that. At wide receiver, here's the thing that is part of the history of the franchise. It hasn't been great for the Jaguars when it comes down to selecting wide receivers in the draft. There have been 31 wide receivers selected since 1995. 9 of those have been selected in the first 3 rounds, but only 2 of those players have produced 1,000-yard seasons. That's Allen Robinson in 2015 and DJ Chark in 2019. However, the good thing, both of those guys were second-round picks. Okay, so as we look at the draft, that might carry some significance because this draft is weighted where I think a bulk of the good wide receivers are going to fall into that second-round category. So as I have the wide receivers categorized, first rounders, Marvin Harrison Jr., Roma Dunze, Malik Neighbors, blue chip prospects, should be gone within the top 10. There's a mid-first round pick prospect in my mind, and that's Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU. Gifted, talented, reminds me a lot of T. Higgins up in Cincinnati. Big ball playmaker, can make a ton of plays. I don't know if he's built to be a number one, but he's a really good player. Coming off in the middle of the first round, that's when Brian Thomas should come off the board. Now, you're the Jaguars, you're at 17. Do you feel like wide receiver is a bigger need than those other positions? I don't know. Like Doug Peterson has talked about, this team doesn't necessarily need a number one to function. The system, the quarterback should elevate receivers where you can get away with playing with a bunch of B pluses. So take that for what it is. That's kind of how it's been viewed. So the middle of the first round prospect to me is Brian Thomas. So now you have a handful of guys that I would say are borderline first rounders, top of second round talents. A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Legette from South Carolina, Xavier Worthy from Texas, Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman from Florida State, Ladd McConkey from Georgia, respectively. So if we think about the bottom of the first round, top of the second round, that's when those names could and probably should come off the board. If you want to ask me which ones are the ones that I think are perfect for the Jaguars, here's what I'll say as a point of reference. Look for guys to come into Jacksonville whenever they pick a wide receiver. It's going to be a polished route runner. It's going to be a high IQ player that has the ability to manage multiple positions, to do that without being flustered or overwhelmed. I think that is going to be the requirement. The other part is consistent, reliable, dependable when it comes to understanding what to do, how to do it, and getting it done. So when I think about that job description, there are a couple of names that come to mind directly in the range that the Jaguars could pick. So Ladd McConkey from Georgia, to me, strikes me as a perfect fit in this offense. Great route runner, tough, tremendous after the catch, high IQ, play for a winning program, gets it in a major way. Keon Coleman also would be interesting because he's a big body playmaker, something that the Jags have not had on the outside in terms of being a red zone threat. Great ball skills. Not the fastest, didn't run fast at the combine, but that neither here nor there. Big body playmaker, so I'm making a ton of plays at Florida State because he dominates on the outside. In the second round, day 2 categories, like purely day 2, we're talking about pick 48 to 96. These are the names that I think you have to talk about. Ricky Pearsall from Florida, he definitely can be in range. Roman Wilson from Michigan would be another one that to me kind of fits the profile. And Javon Baker from Central Florida is one. You hear some other names out there. Jermaine Burton is fast and athletic. He possibly could be a guy that can enhance the receiver core. Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky. But if you had to ask me, preference for the Jaguars, the way I look at them, Ricky Pearsall, Roman Wilson, Javon Baker from Central Florida should be the names. Let's go to defense. At cornerback, the new style of defense is going to require a different style of cornerback. It's going to require the guy that comes in to be a bump and run corner, someone who is really comfortable playing man-to-man, but also has zone capabilities, ball skills, tackling ability, and an overall awareness of how to fit into the puzzle of the defense. When I think about the first round, so we're talking about pick 17, a few names to think about. Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo may be the first cornerback to go off the board. I'm worried about him being available at 17 because I'm looking at the Colts at 15, and he just might be gone. He fits the profile, super athletic, long, rangy. Chris Ballard, their general manager, typically goes for those kinds of guys. Terrion Arnold from Alabama. To me, he's kind of like the guy, the perfect fit. The reason why, high IQ, physical, played under Nick Saban, so he's been well-trained, understands the bigger picture, how to fit in, played outside, but also played inside. played in a winning program, kind of knows the professionalism that is needed to play at a high level, at a championship level, at the next level. That should be good. Cooper DeJean is one of my favorites. Coming from Iowa, I got to tell you this about Iowa players, man. They are well-schooled, great technicians. He has all of that. Has versatility, can play outside, can play inside, meaning he can play outside corner, he can play inside at the nickel, but also has the ability to be a slot defender. That versatility, man, just gives the D coordinator a lot of options, having a Swiss Army knife that he can plug in wherever he needs to. He's a really, really good football player. Nate Wiggins from Clemson, super fast, a little slight, but fast, active, good ball skills, played a variety of techniques at Clemson, really good player. Kool-Aid McKinstry, similar to Terrion Arnold, not quite as explosive, but this dude has been good on the corner for a long time down at Alabama. In the first round at 17, I think any of those names could be in play. If for some reason the Jaguars find themselves falling back, they're at the bottom of the first round, top of the second round, here are the names I think you have to keep an eye on. Enos Rakestraw from Missouri, tough, physical player, high IQ, can play. Mikey Sandrestrill from Michigan, nickel player, the best nickel player in the draft in my mind. Former wide receiver, ton of ball skills, great leader, just active. He can do it all. Can blitz off the edge, can cover. He's just a slot corner. He's going to play for a long time in this league. Max Melton from Rutgers is another guy, second round. Outside or inside, Max Melton is intriguing. Really good job down at the Senior Bowl. Very competitive, very athletic, explosive. Kind of the I won't even say the developmental guy, but the guy that can come in and play. He has all the athletic attributes that you look for. When we go to day 2, so third round conversation, guys to just keep an eye on. Kamari Lassiter from Georgia, inside-outside player, has experience doing both. Really good player, long, athletic. Keep an eye on Kyrie Jackson from Oregon. Super long, extra long arms, can play, got a little nastiness and swag to him. Really intriguing player. And Renardo Green from Florida State. Really good player, solid, probably underrated throughout the process. Another player to think about. So when we're thinking about that 48 to 96 range, those are the names that we could kind of be talking about when it comes to the Jaguars. And then let's just talk about the edge rushers. Dallas Turner from Alabama, Jerry Verse from Florida State, Liatu Latu, top 3 pass rushers, really good depending on style. If you want a power player, that could be Jerry Verse. If you want the speed and athletic finesse player with all the technique, that is Latu. I think he's the best one when it comes to putting it all together. And then Dallas Turner is a blend, really productive, really active, had a lot of success at Alabama. He's a name to keep an eye on. Bottom of the first round, Chop Robinson from Florida State, Darius Robinson from Missouri, really active players. Production isn't at the highest level, but really good players that can start for a long time in this league. And then when we get to day 2, second and third round candidates that I think if they're available, the Jaguars could definitely take a look at. Think about Muhammad Kamara from Colorado State, really good player. Mountain West Co-Defensive Player of the Year, a lot of sack production throughout his career, 13 his final season. He is good. Austin Booker from Kansas, really intriguing. Didn't play much at Minnesota, goes to KU and dominates. Kind of plays the game like Max Crosby. Remember, Max Crosby was drafted in the 4th round. This guy has similar traits, maybe more athleticism, really good player. Other names to keep an eye on, Marshawn Nealon from Western Michigan, Jonah Ellis from Utah, and then Braylon Trice from UW. So as we think about the draft, think about nailing the first 3 rounds. If the Jaguars crush the first 3 rounds, they've significantly improved their team, and they've put their team back in a situation where they not only can win the division, but maybe they can make some noise in the postseason. So that's a little draft preview, a little offseason recap. Went a little longer than I wanted, but I felt like it was really important that we set the frame so that when we go and we look at the draft Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we have a general idea of how Trent Baalke, Doug Peterson, and the staff want to attack the team. So if you have any comments for me, make sure you hit me up on X at Bucky Brooks. You can hit me up on IG, Instagram at Big Play Football. Maybe you even know, believe, I'm sure we have an account to do that. But that was the first podcast. Hopefully you come back and tune in as we give you more information, details, and insight on the Jaguars. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you next time.